Hi everyone, Chris here. In this video I want to tell you about my experience of chasing the Northern Lights and also show you if the camera sensors of the Sony RX100 VII and the iPhone 14 Pro Max are sensitive enough to capture photos and videos of the aurora. To search for the Northern Lights, I traveled to Tromsø in Norway. The city is located in northern Norway above the Arctic Circle. When I was there in mid-November, they already had a lot of snow and the temperatures were below freezing. At this time of the year, you get about 3 hours of daylight, which means that you have an extended nighttime and therefore a higher probability of seeing the Northern Lights. Before booking the trip, I also looked at the moon phases and planned the trip around new moon, so that the nights would be darker, which would allow me to capture the Northern Lights even better. The day after my arrival, the conditions looked promising, so I prepared the camera. You really want to do this in the warm apartment before getting out in the freezing cold. These were the settings I used that would serve as a starting point. First, I switched the camera to manual mode, the shutter speed to 3.2 seconds, the aperture to its widest setting at 2.8 to let in as much light as possible, the ISO to 1600 and the file format to RAW and JPEG. The white balance I set to 3500 Kelvin. The drive mode to save timer with 2 seconds to avoid potential movement of the tripod. The focus I set to manual focus, so I could focus on a star or a distant light and be sure that the focus does not change. Then I saved the settings to memory, so that I could use memory recall to always reset the camera to these settings, because you will experiment with the settings like shutter speed and ISO as the aurora changes. Other settings I changed were to switch off the long exposure noise reduction, which takes effect after 1/3 of a second shutter time. And also I switched off the high ISO noise reduction. The color space I set to Adobe RGB, because this gives you more colors in the green color spectrum. I also turned off image stabilization because I was going to use a tripod with the save timer. After preparing the camera, it was finally time to chase the Northern Lights. Therefore, I booked a trip for a Northern Light chase with a local company. There are many different companies offering tours like this, but I ended up using Arctic Guide Service. Here you can see the prices and what is included in the service. This video is not sponsored, I just happened to use them. What you can't see on this information is that they use a bigger bus with toilets that you can use when the bus is standing. Also, you can always get into the bus if you need to warm up or just want to take a break from taking pictures. Sometimes the aurora activity dies down only to reignite after a couple of minutes, so you can use that time to warm up. While you are in the bus, they have a guide providing you with additional information about the Northern Lights.
When we see pink lights or violet northern lights, then the nitrogen is colliding with the solar material.
As you can see on the display in the bus, it was about -5 degrees outside. Here in the background you can see the lights of Tromsø, while to the right it is dark and you can see the Northern Lights. This photo was taken in this location, with a 10-second shutter and an ISO of 1000. What you see here is the JPEG version that is generated directly by the Sony camera. And this is the edited version of the RAW version of the same photo. As you can see, the result looks much better. For editing the RAW image, I used Affinity Photo 2. Here you can see the settings I used in the develop persona. By the way, looking at the histogram, I forgot to mention before that you should take test shots on location and make use of the histogram to check your exposure and ISO. You cannot trust the display of the camera for an accurate representation of the image. This is especially important if you are going to take a series of shots like for a time-lapse, for example. Speaking of time-lapses, I tried to take a time-lapse on this location, but I couldn't increase the shutter speed over 1/4 of a second. As I found out later, this has to do with the shutter type settings in the interval shoot function. On the second page of the interval shoot function, you have to change the shutter type from electronic shutter to mechanical shutter. This will enable you to open the shutter for up to 30 seconds. Something that I would have to remember for the next chasing trip. I also took photos with the iPhone 14 Pro Max in the same location, and here you can see the settings that the iPhone selected automatically. Unfortunately, I forgot to switch on RAW mode on the iPhone, but the result is not too bad, and you can even make some color corrections on it. This is the result when I adjust the colors in Final Cut Pro. After eating some cookies and having a hot drink to warm up, we continued to our second stop. On our way, we got lucky and even saw some reindeer. Unfortunately, it started to snow heavily, and we couldn't see any further northern lights on that evening. So we returned to the beautiful snowy Tromsø and finished our tour. Here you can see the backside of the Arctic Cathedral with its colorful big window illuminated during the night. The next days there would be a lot of snow and clouds, so seeing the northern lights would be difficult. But this gave me time to visit the city center of Tromsø and to do some sightseeing. As it was getting darker, they switched on the Christmas decoration, which looked really nice. I also passed by the tourist information, which you can find at the port. After that, I visited an old brewery founded in 1877 and offering beer from 72 taps. Cheers, everyone! Then it was time to leave. There are also some really nice cafes to warm up, like this one, close to the big bridge. And of course they have some museums, like for example the Polar Museum, to spend some time. But during these days I kept an eye if the conditions for the northern lights would improve. Therefore I used an app called Aurora Pro. There you can see information about cloud coverage, solar wind activity, the KPI index and webcams of other regions, like for example Finland. This gives you a good idea if your chances increase. So the snow was fun for a couple of days and made for some beautiful pictures. But then it stopped snowing and it was time for another trip to chase the northern lights. On this tour the bus drove in direction of the Finnish border, and on our first stop I took this time-lapse where you can see the clouds passing in front of the northern lights. And this time-lapse was taken very close to the Finnish border. For these time-lapses I set the shooting start time to 2 seconds and the interval to 30 seconds. I configured it to 300 shots but I ran out of battery after about 125 shots. Remember to bring spare batteries with you that you carry close to your body. The battery dies fast when you have -12 degrees outside, as we had on this day. Unfortunately, the conditions on this trip weren't quite as good as on the first trip, and it also was about a 2-hour drive in one direction to come close to the Finnish border. I spent about 170 euros on these 2 trips, and I thought to myself, so that was it. But little did I know that the best was still to come. The last day before my flight back home, I decided to climb up to a viewpoint called Sherpatrappa. It is a bit slippery to climb up to this viewpoint, but the panoramic view on Tromsø is worthwhile the effort. After coming down the hill, I decided to walk over to the city again. And then it started to get dark again, and the light show started directly over the city of Tromsø. First there were only faint lights over the bridge, but then they got stronger and stronger. I even could take a video of them with my iPhone. But then they died down and I walked back to the other side of the bridge. But that evening they ignited again and I saw the strongest northern lights of all these 8 days I was in Tromsø. And this is the night just before my departure. Here are some photos I took with my iPhone. And in this video, also taken with my iPhone, you can see the movement of the aurora in real time. And if you look really close, you can even see some violet color on the lower end of the green color. This light show was really magical. And I absolutely didn't expect that I would be able to see the northern lights over the light pollution of the city that strong. Well, and with this happy end, I leave you with some more impressions of the northern lights and say goodbye until a future video. Don't forget to hit the like button if you like the video and subscribe for more videos like this. Bye bye!